few years, a number of studies have been shown in regards to organizations, performance, and trust. Interestingly enough, 70% of employees believe that trust and loyalty within their organizations is on the decline. And if you think about that, we've had a number of different challenges over the past few years, one of which being the financial crisis. And now that the economy is picking up, a lot of folks are questioning and skeptical around, where the firm is, or their organizations are focused. 60% of employees do not believe that their management is ethical and honest, which I'm not sure what that says about big business in the world, but that's a pretty sizable figure to think about.
Again,
50%. Yeah.
If you have advanced past the "Hello, I'm Kurt" screen, I'm not sure if it's advancing.
No, it is. It is not. We're
Okay.
still not there. Just starting with some stats. But thanks
Request.
for
Okay,
asking.
thank you.
You bet. 50% believe that a lack of trust is a problem in their workplace, and that was based on 57 organizations that were surveyed. And then lastly, and this one that may be a little bit more close to home, is 70% of employees that were surveyed in a particular study said they wouldn't speak up because they fear repercussions. So all of this is designed to kind of help us understand that at the fundamental level in our organizations, trust is such a huge component of what makes up an organization that is high performing. So let's talk a little bit about what Patrick Lencioni, that many of you may be familiar with. He is a well-renowned speaker. Many of you probably have read his book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. If you Google it or go onto Amazon in business books, it tends to be #1, and it's been around for a while. So Pat's perspective on this is members of great teams trust one another on a fundamental emotional level, and they are comfortable being vulnerable with each other about their weaknesses, mistakes, fears, and behaviors. And he sees that as the foundation of high-performing teams. So when we get to that level where I can be comfortable sharing my weakness, mistakes, fears, and behaviors, I have the ability as a teammate and as a team member and as a team to move the organization forward. So that's where we're going to begin and talk a lot about in our organization in this webinar. So what is trust? It's a term that's used very loosely in the world, but when we think about trust, trust is, in essence, my faith in your ability or your word in whatever it is that you're associated with. So I have to have faith that what you say and what you are going to do are going to match your actions. It's the degree to which I believe you will look out for my best interest. Are you in this for yourself, or are you in this for me, and ultimately are you in this for the team? It represents a level of care that you have about my welfare and success in helping me achieve my goals. So when I'm in a trusting relationship, I know that you are looking out for me, and I'm going to be looking out for you. And when people are transparent and honest with one another, then we can build what we call vulnerability-based trust. And one of the things that differentiates in a team is the difference between predictive trust and vulnerability-based trust. Predictive trust is I've worked with you long enough that I can predict what your actions are going to be. And that's not necessarily always going to develop the type of trust we need to move an organization forward. So what we're going to talk about is this concept of vulnerability-based trust. This is where I can be honest with you and say things like, you know what, I screwed up. I totally missed the mark on that. Or, you know what, I know I'm in charge of this project, but I'm having some struggles in this area. Can I get some assistance? Or probably the hardest thing for people to say is when something doesn't go the way it's supposed to go, to be honest with your coworker, your teammate, and say, I'm really sorry that happened. I'm sorry that I let you down. Those are things that build that vulnerability-based trust. And in organizations, that's difficult because sometimes people see that as being a sign of weakness. But when we talk about working with the team, it's around a sign of strength that I can do that. So what are the principles of trust? Well, we know that trust is never given to another person globally and unconditionally. There's always things associated with it. But it involves your abilities, and it also involves your word. For example, I look at this as, you have to be competent in your job, so can I trust you that you know what you're doing? But also, what's your character? And can I trust that you're going to do what you say you do? And how are you going to treat me? And we really see that, that team trust and that individual trust comes when you have that combination of the character and competence. And we know that as we develop our relationships, that trust comes in different degrees or different levels. Some people start with, I'm not going to trust you until I see your behaviors over a long period of time. Others of us go into all relationships with a very trusting perspective. But what we do know is trust can be built. And that's one of the principles. We can build trust as we go. But on the same side of that, we also know that trust can erode between people. And many of you have probably heard that it can take a long time to build trust and a very quick amount of time to erode trust. But the good news is, even if there's been an issue where trust is eroded, you can rebuild and rehabilitate that. So those are kind of the basic principles of trust. So let's talk a little bit about what the building blocks are that are going to get you to that level of trust on a team and with yourself. And we use a tool called the 5 Behaviors of Cohesive Team, which I will talk about a little bit later. And all of these building blocks are components of that first building, that first area, which is trust. So we'll talk a little bit about being easily readable, how to be open. Back to that vulnerability. Are you able to be vulnerable with your teammates? If you're the leader of a team, are you able to be vulnerable with your team members? This issue of feedback. How do you deliver it and how do you take it? Do you genuinely care about the people that you work with and the people that work for you and that you work for? What's your level of sincerity? And then very important, are you demonstrating are you demonstrating trustworthiness? Are you somebody that people can trust? So we're going to talk about each one of these individually. So let's begin with easily readable. What does that mean? Well, basically your outside matches your inside. What you think is what you are doing. People can discern your emotional state. They don't have to guess. I look at it as when I have a coworker or when I'm being easily readable, people don't have to guess what's going on with me. They can see what's going on with me. They hear it, they observe it, and there's not a lot of sleuthing that I have to do to try to figure out what do they really mean by this? What are they trying to accomplish with what they're saying? So, that first fundamental behavior that you have is, am I demonstrating what I'm thinking? Can people see what I'm thinking? So being easily readable is a basic area of building trust within the team and within your teammates. The second area is being open. And in this we mean by being strategically open. It means, be honest with your responses to what others want or ask from you. And some of us are very agreeable. We will say yes to anything, even though we have no idea what we're doing in some cases. And again, it goes back to that vulnerability. It will lead to that vulnerability-based trust. But, think about it. Is it something that you can do or you can't do? And if you can't, be honest with your coworkers and say, you know what, here's the issues that I have. Be honest and open with what you need from others to make the task and project successful. I know these seem like easy concepts, but think about the last group conversations you had. Were people being open, or were you hearing about things after the meeting? Be open about what you are good at, your strengths, and also what you may not be so good at. We know that nobody is perfect, and some of us bring much more in skills in one area versus others, but that's what makes a team so strong is we can pick up each other's opportunities and offset each other and really have that collaborative environment. And the more open you are with your coworkers and your leaders and leaders with your employees, that brings more openness from them. If they see you role modeling that behavior, and it takes a risk at times depending upon your organizational culture, you'll start to see openness come back to you. And ultimately, it's that level of openness that you offer that starts to build that trust. When people can see what you mean and you're open with your statements, then you start to build that trusting relationship with your coworkers and your employees. Item number 3, and this is one that's very difficult, is being vulnerable. In this day and age, sometimes it's very challenging to be vulnerable because, again, it's seen as a sign of weakness. But we're here to tell you the more vulnerable you can get within your team, the stronger the team is going to be. One concept that we talk a lot about is take a one-down position. If you're the leader of the team, you don't always have to be the boss. Take a step back and kind of Look at the world through your team's perspective. You don't have to always lead the charge. If you're a team member, and this is one of my challenges, is, I don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. I pride myself in having a lot of knowledge and information, but sometimes people get tired of hearing my knowledge and information, and I need to kind of step back a little bit. And we talk a lot about power, and power is something that needs to be used very judiciously. When you are using power, you tend to get resistance. But if you're using vulnerability, you tend to get more willingness. Power kind of gets you in a difficult situation when you're trying to push your opinions on others. But when you really kind of step back and say, hey, I really want to hear what the team has to say. I have an idea, but I'm not sure if it's the best idea. So what can you tell me that helps move the organization forward? You'll start to see more openness, and you'll start to see people coming towards you versus putting up the resistance. Now, feedback is always an interesting area in building trust, because we have a lot of preconceived notions around what feedback is. But feedback is really that ability to give and receive information, in some cases spontaneously, but also always consciously. I'm here to help you, and I'm also looking for you to help me. And anytime we provide feedback, it should be done from a philosophy of care, which we'll talk about in just a second. One of the biggest challenges to many teams and individuals on teams is their willingness and openness to accept feedback. So as a team member, welcome that feedback, respect that it's honest. And again, if you have the higher the trust of the relationship, the more candid and more candor can be shared in regards to feedback from others. And so when people are giving you feedback, really welcome it. Thank them for the opportunity, because they're really putting themselves out there to help you in the long run. And then do the same for others. When there's an opportunity for you to give some folks feedback, don't withhold, but do it with that concept of care in mind, that I'm here to help you, and by the fact of us having this interaction, it's going to help the team in the long run. Now, again, as I mentioned, feedback is something that has some negative connotations to it at times. If I get called into the office for some feedback, I'm automatically going into this meeting potentially with a defensive posture. A lot of times when we think about feedback in the workplace, our expectation is that it's going to be some sort of criticism. Somebody's going to be evaluating me or judging me. Ultimately it could be about punishing me, and that's a really about me perspective. And what I want to do is kind of introduce this concept, or a more healthy theory, which is, what is the purpose of feedback is really about helping me get better. And so it's really about the individual giving the feedback, looking for ways to help me get to the level, and us as a team to get to the goal that we are striving for, that they're doing so in a way that's going to benefit me. I always tell a story about my wife. She's been in the industry for a long time, and I've always looked up to her ability to give feedback to people, and she can give very difficult feedback to people. In some cases, I've had people who have come to me after she's actually fired them, and they're thankful. Because they walk away knowing that the reason that she's giving them this feedback, sometimes very difficult feedback, is to help them grow. And they appreciate it because they know what's driving, what her motive is behind that. So that's the difference between the me and the you. I'm here to help you and give that feedback. And when you're giving feedback, it's about your willingness and ability to respond to those individuals and expressing them thoughts. And when you receive it, these are my thoughts, and I own those thoughts. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just, here's how I'm feeling at this point in time, and I want to give you that feedback. When you're receiving that feedback, accept it graciously and non-defensively. And again, I'll go back to my wife. I'm not always good at that. When my wife gives me feedback, I'm automatically in the defensive posture, but I need to kind of change my mindset a little bit. So we've got to change our perspective about what feedback is all about, and get away from that traditional perspective. And if you have to give feedback to a team, or a teammate or a team member, many of you have gone through many workshops around how to give feedback. But ultimately, in this electronic day and age, the one thing that we are struggling with now is a lot of time feedback is being given electronically, which is not the greatest medium. If you're going to give feedback, it's best to do it live. Knock on that person's office door, go to their cubicle, find a meeting space to sit down with them. If you're in a remote situation where that person is not in the same building as we do, pick up the phone. To send an email with feedback just erodes trust, especially if that feedback is somewhat difficult. Once you've gotten contact with them live, tell them exactly what it is that you're seeing, the event, the behavior, whatever it is that you need to give feedback. Let them know how it's impacting you or the team, and then what are the consequences. And they could be positive consequences. Sometimes feedback is, I really appreciate how quickly you got this report in for us, because that now has led us to make a great decision in a much shorter period of time. So there's positive and negative consequences. And then ask them what you want them to do differently or more of the next time, and get that agreement from them, and then share appreciation at the end. So it's just a step-by-step approach. Many of you probably have specific feedback models in place at your organizations. This is just one that we like to use. Our next building block is on caring, and this is again, there's the perspective. It's about business. Why should I care? We got to get the job done. But ultimately, life is short, and we want to work in environments and situations where we care about the people we work with, and they care about us. It's an essential leadership quality. You have to be competent, you have to be confident, and you have to care about those that you work with. And caring about people and our relations with them communicates that they're important. You're important to the organization, but more importantly, you're important to me. And if you're getting negative criticism or strong emotions, bring them to me. I will deal with it in a way that respects you and protects you and keeps our relationship high. I realize that you're not always going to agree with me, and that's great. Matter of fact, I would rather you share that with me versus share with others, because that then will erode our relationship. And over on the screen, you'll see that we have the HEART model. Again, another model that we've come across. You may have other models, but when you are receiving feedback or you're given feedback, here's something to keep in mind. H stands for hear and understand me. Many of you probably get feedback, and this is one that my wife always talks to me about, is when I'm talking to you, I don't want you to solve the problem. I just want you to hear and understand the situation that I'm in. And that's difficult for me because I'm a problem solver. So she lays out a problem, I want to solve the issue. The E stands for even if you disagree, please don't make me wrong. Again, another challenge is, if I disagree, I can disagree about the issue, but I don't have to make it a personal attack. Disagree with the issue, but don't make me wrong. Acknowledge the greatness within me is the A. I am happy to have you on my team. I appreciate you sharing this information. This is really valuable and helpful to all of us. And remember that, and this is the R, that I have good intentions. When I'm coming to you and giving feedback, I do have good intentions. Are there people out there that do things maliciously? Sure, but that's a small percentage in relations to our overall workforce. And then lastly, the T, tell me the truth with compassion. If I'm coming at it in a way that is maybe not positive for me, tell me the truth, but with some compassion, again, to demonstrate to me that you're caring about me and helping me get to the next level. Because as employees, and we've all done this in our career, we have an interesting perspective that isn't necessarily beneficial and positive for us. And it's very helpful when somebody that we trust gives us that feedback so that we don't make even a bigger mistake down the road. All right. Next on our list, number 6, sincerity. And again, some of us are more naturally able to be sincere, but what we define as sincerity is acting without deceit or pretense. Are you trying to manipulate me, but really being genuine and straightforward in my relationships? Again, going back to that being easily readable. Are my actions matching my words? Can you see what I'm saying? The word congruence gets used. Are your thoughts and feelings matching your words and actions? And building trust really requires that you're sincere and congruent. And here's the key word, that I'm consistent at it so that others can trust. If I say I'm going to do this, then I demonstrate I do this. If I do this over an extended period of time, then people will then start to build a higher level of trust with me. Now, what can get in the way of being sincere? What are things that you may have seen in your organizations that maybe make people believe that you're less than sincere? Well, we know the evils of gossiping. Gossip can erode the trust amongst the team, trust in a team leader, trust in coworkers. In the moment, it seems like my coworker may be agreeing with me when I'm gossiping about another coworker. But how many of you have sat there and said, boy, if this is what they're saying about Steve, what do they say about me when I'm not here? So that little erosion of trust, and it just starts to build upon himself. Certainly any kind of lying, or this is a word I use with my granddaughter a lot, fibbing, misleading of others, and especially if it's at your own personal gain at the expense of others, that can start to erode trust, but also can let people know that you're not being very sincere in your words. And on the flip side, there's this concept of hiding our strong feelings. If you have an opinion about something, to not say it and then have it come out later on can create this lack of trust, but also can demonstrate to your coworkers that, maybe I'm not being as sincere as I possibly could be, or maybe they're not being as sincere with me as they possibly could be. And then lastly, we're going to get into step number 6, or building block number 6, is being trustworthy. That's really a step that we see. You could almost interchange that and make it the first one for some folks. But what does that mean? In essence, it's your word can be trusted. It's like if I say X, I'm going to do Y, and it's going to be trusted. I've got a pattern of behavior. Giving your word in agreement and being willing to accept the consequences of that agreement. And sometimes what happens to us in the workplace, we're all overwhelmingly busy. We all have too much on our plate. And in the spirit of trying to move the needle, in the spirit of helping the team move forward, we get a little loose with our word. We get a little careless, if you will, with our agreements. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I'll be happy to do that for you. And we do this out of politeness. In the back of our mind, we're saying to ourselves, I'm not sure how I'm going to get this done, but I don't want to offend my friend who's a coworker I've worked with a long time, so I'll go ahead and say, yes, I can do it. And then ultimately you might not be able to, and so that starts to erode trust. Maybe you say yes to some vague and ambiguous agreements. It's like, well, I kind of think I know what they want, so rather than pretend like I have no clue what they're talking about, I'll go ahead and agree and try to figure it out later. I'll circle back with them. And ultimately, that leads to an erosion of trust when you're not able to live up to the agreement that you kind of thought you figured out, but really didn't have an idea. Again, sometimes we just get caught up in the moment. Sure, we're all in this, and my favorite scene from Animal House, where John Belushi is like trying to rally the troops, and he runs out of the building, and really nobody's behind him. Well, sometimes we all run out to the building, and we're not even sure why we're running out of the building, and then we forget to kind of come back to it. It's like, what did we agree to? That gets a little loose with our agreements. And then sometimes agreements you don't intend to keep and hope the other person will forget. It's like, I'm just going to say this now because, you know what, Steve never remembers, so I'm just going to say, yeah, I can do it, and he'll probably forget. Unfortunately, there's probably a lot more times when Steve remembers those agreements that you fail to live up to. So how do you honor your word? How do you work by agreement? What are things that you can do to demonstrate that trustworthiness? Again, make only the agreements that you know you can keep. And again, our business is so stressful at times. Sometimes we ask people to do things, and we don't give them that extra moment to say, is this something you can do? Is this something that's going to fit within your existing job structure or your existing workload? We just hope they say yes, and then we can move on to the next topic. But make only those agreements you intend to keep. Avoid making or accepting fuzzy agreements. If you're not sure, ask clarifying questions until you feel like you're confident that you understand what it is that you're agreeing to. And if things start to go off the rails, if there's issues that says, I said I could do this, but now I'm seeing some signs that I may not be able to do that, get in early. Don't wait until the last minute, because then people feel as if you are not living up to the agreement at that point in time, and that slowly erodes the trust within them. And if ultimately you've done all of these things and you still ended up with an agreement that you were not able to live up to, circle back with that person. Let's go back to that openness and honesty and that vulnerability and the ability to say, you know what, I know I agreed to have this to you by Tuesday. I should have let you know last Friday that I wasn't going to be able to live up to that. How can we move forward from this? What can we do differently next time? And I take full responsibility for that. As I'm making these statements, I'm sure some of you are maybe out in the audience going, boy, that's kind of difficult. I don't know if I could do that. I mean, that puts me at some risk within my organization. And if those are the feelings that are going through, that lets you know that there's some opportunity within your team or within your organization to help build trust. Now, the good news is we have to get real with ourselves, and we have to get real with our people. And at our organization, at People and Performance Strategy, teamwork is not just a label. This is really a philosophy. And in today's world, more and more organizations are using the team structure to get the job done. And that comes with really good consequences, and it can also come with some challenging consequences. Everybody gets the concept of team. We've all been part of a team for most of our lives, whether it's our family team, it's our sports team, it's our school team. I mean, there's so many teams that we've been involved in. And it's simple to grasp intellectually, but it's challenging when you put it into practice, because we have to, on a team, you have so many different personalities, different opinions, egos. All of that has to be balanced and to work in order for the team to reach its peak. And you can look at it as, focusing on teamwork, that's kind of a pain. Focus on building trust with a team, that takes too much time. That takes me off of my job task. And ultimately, what we would like to say is it really should be looked at as an opening. Here's an opportunity for us to help our organizations, whether it's one team, 5 teams, 10 teams. If we can get past all the drama, the politics, the wasted energy, that helps us become a little bit more competitive. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But think about how teamwork at work impacts your real world. It impacts your lives, whether you're at work and you're at home. How many of you leave work after a frustrating team meeting and share that with your significant other or your family or your friends that don't work with you? For your organization to be more effective, your people need to really get real with themselves, take some personal accountability, but also with each other and say, what can we do better? And when we talk about building trust on a team, you may feel like, well, we have a good trusting team. Excellent. How can you get it to the next level? So again, another quote from Patrick Lencioni, not to be confused with Patrick Yearout, who I know is on the call, is it's not finance, it's not strategy, it's not technology. Realistically, teamwork is the ultimate competitive advantage because it's so powerful and so rare. And many of you know that I come from a long history in hospitality, worked in the restaurant business for over 30 years, and in the restaurant industry, and in a lot of industries, the fine line between you and your competitor is very thin. And if you come up with a fantastic idea that sets you apart from your competition, that time of being set apart from the competition is very short, because competition by its nature is, okay, they've come up with a great idea, so I need to have something very similar to that. And then next thing you know, you're no different than the next person. And when you think about quick service restaurants, you can look across one block of road and see 7 different fast food restaurants there, and the only difference, yes, they use different products, but a burger is a burger, a chicken sandwich is a chicken sandwich. The ultimate difference between what goes on in one restaurant versus the other is how well that team works together. And even in some of your organizations, you have different properties or different departments or different divisions, and you see it happening there. Everybody's focusing on the same goal, but ultimately some teams perform better than other teams, and and that's their competitive advantage. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works. So the good news is your teams can do better. There are ways to build that trust amongst the team. There's ways to build your team to the highest level. And it is easier said than done. I'm sure some of you are thinking that. It is easier said than be done, but it is a problem that I think and we think is holding back our organizations. It's messy. There's a lot of issues that have to be worked through, but it's not it is a burden, but it's not. let's look at it more from a perspective of what's the opportunity. If we can build trust in our team and we can have open and honest conversations and address issues in a way that focuses on the issue and not on the person, come out of that with commitments that we can then deliver upon. And if it doesn't happen, we hold each other accountable, and then we put the goal of the organization first prior to our own personal organization. Think about how powerful that is and how that would set your team or your organization apart from your competitions. So you can do better. And there's a lot of tools out there in the world. Stephen Covey has a great tool called the Speed of Trust. There's a number of tools out there that talk about building trust and building teams. One that we particularly prescribe to and use with our clients a lot is the concept of the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Many of you may know this more as the 5 dysfunctions of a team. It is all based off of Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions book. If you've never read that book or if you have not come across that book, I highly encourage you to get it. It will help you help your teams move to the next level. We have put some tools around this, so we work with teams to guide them up the pyramid, and it's put in a pyramid fashion because it really starts with the foundation of trust. You can't get to results, and I talk with a lot of prospective clients, folks in operations, and they usually come to us, and the area that they want to focus in on first is accountability, or they want to focus in on results. And what that tells me is they're seeing the symptoms of what's not happening at the lower levels. So we spent a good portion of this webinar on the area of trust. Once I have a vulnerability-based trust amongst my team, then I'm allowed to engage in constructive and productive conflict in the organization, and we can have debates about issues and processes and systems and really air all of our perspectives. And as a leader, you want that from your team. You want them to disagree with you. You want them to disagree with others, but the key is disagreeing on the issue and not on the person. And you can't do that until you build trust. Once I've engaged in that dialogue, I can then commit and say, this is what we're going to do. And even if I still disagree with the direction, because I've had the opportunity to share my opinion and I trust the team, I'm able to commit, and I'm able to disagree, but I'm able to commit. And then as we move up, when things don't happen, I feel comfortable with my team, holding them accountable, and this is not just the leader, but this is the team holding each other accountable. And I also will feel comfortable when my teammate holds me accountable. And then lastly, in the tip of the pyramid is this concept of results. And it seems like, wow, that's just a natural progression, and it is, but the difference here at the results is this is the team results versus the individual results. And when I facilitate a session on this and we get to this level, I always ask the audience, I'm like, okay, which would you rather be? Would you rather be the best player on the last place team or the worst player on the championship team? And invariably, in my unscientific data collection method, I would say the response has always been 100%, I'd rather be the worst player on the championship team, because there's just something that goes with that. And yes, I could get individual accolades, but I really want to see the team succeed. So that's the model that we use. We encourage you to use whatever model is going to help, but always remember that at the foundation, no matter what model you use, it's this concept of trust, and how do you build trust in your organization. And I could look around out at the audience, and I can look at my fellow teammates and say, I need you to trust me, but it really starts with those building blocks, and it starts with you. What can I do to build trust with my teammates and my team members and my boss? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to some questions. I don't know if there's some questions out there that have already come to you, Tara, but I'm open to any questions that people have.
Okay, I have there are some questions starting to come in. One that has come in a couple times. People are asking if the slideshow will be available afterwards, and I'll let you all know that this has all been recorded, and you can see it on the chart website later today, and that would be the slideshow with the audio over it. But Kurt, I think you said that the slideshow is available if anyone emails you directly?
Yeah, exactly. I'd be happy to send it to anybody who would like to get a copy, and I'll send you the a PDF with the notes version so that you can see kind of the substance behind the images.
Okay. I have one question that came in. All it says is preferred team building tools, question mark.
Yeah, that's always, it comes up, and a lot of leaders look for, how do I build my team, and what are some team building tools? And we've all participated in a number of these. Sometimes they get ridiculed. I don't know how many of you have ever been on a ropes course. Certainly a great way to build teamwork. We've done chart. What I love about going to chart is the whole concept of a service event. I think that's a great way to build teams. And uses team building with what we use with the 5 behaviors. We use an assessment because sometimes helping the team get stronger is helping the team understand where they're at. And so the assessment gives us that dialogue with which we can build from, and kind of surfaces those issues up in front of everybody, and we can talk about them, and that's a great way to build teams.
Okay, what are some ways to build vulnerability-based trust?
There's a number of things you can do, and ultimately, one of the things is start with yourself. You can build vulnerability-based trust as a leader if you go first. Be the first to open up. Be the first to share, your foibles, your challenges. That starts building that vulnerability-based trust. Many of you've probably read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. I realize everybody's on a short timeline to getting things accomplished, but sometimes stepping back and letting others speak is a great way to shorten that timeline. We do an exercise in the course of the training called the personal histories, and it's a very simple exercise that really just asks people to answer 3 simple questions. Where were you raised? Where did you grow up? What birth order are you in? Are you the oldest, the youngest, the middle, the number of 5? And then what was one thing growing up, an experience or an issue that you had growing up that's kind of formed you in your later lives? And just having everybody go around and have the responses to those questions, you'd be amazed at how that starts to build that vulnerability-based trust, because it then brings people back to a little bit more of a personal level. So those are a couple of things that we do or we would suggest.
Okay, another one is, what are some red flags that there is a lack of trust on a team?
I will tell you the number 1 red flag is around meetings. I don't know how many of you out there have ever had the experience where every meeting is the same meeting. You're talking about the same issues, coming back and readdressing the same challenges, and you never seem to move the needle. Or B, the meetings are pretty boring. And all you're doing is shopping on Amazon or checking out the latest Facebook quiz and posting that, and you really don't feel like anything's getting accomplished. And it's, why is that a symptom? It's a red flag. Is because people don't trust each other to say anything. They just painfully get through the time so they can get back to doing what they're doing. A couple of other things that I see that are red flags, what I call hallway commando conversations, or more dangerously, that gossip that occurs outside of meetings or around the workplace, or those people that what I call malicious obedience, or the bobblehead syndrome. They sit in meetings nodding their heads, all knowing full well, I'm not doing this because I know the guy next to me, he's not going to do it, so why should I put any effort? So those are some red flags that we see sometimes in organizations, or we hear that clients talk about as they engage us.
Okay, one very short one. Could you please repeat what the A stood for in heart?
Oh, what did the A stand for? That's a great question. So, when we look at the A, it's really about, and I'm going back to it to make sure I say it exactly like I said before, is to make sure that you are acknowledging the greatness within me.
Okay. When trust has been eroded, what would be the first thing to do, step to building it back?
I think, again, it gets back to getting real. And so when you go back to that being open, being vulnerable, just stepping back and saying, you know what, I screwed up. If it was the other person, and obviously you're in a 2-way dialogue, and if the other person's not willing to take that step forward, that's going to present a little bit more of a challenge. But you can always take the first step, even if it was their issue, and say, here's how I felt about this. This really made me uncomfortable, or this really let the team down, and I want to talk about it, and I want to, really let you know I'm here to help. And again, applying the heart model, that might be that feedback area. as you're trying to build that trust back up with an individual.
Okay, and what are the biggest barriers to building trust?
You know, after having worked with a number of teams and then ultimately looking back at my 30 plus years being a part of teams, I would say a lot of times it can be the leader. You know, leaders have this expectation, well, I'm the leader, so I'm the one who's supposed to be doing all of these things. And you know, taking that one step back and saying, no, this is about the team. How do I get the team engaged? So I think sometimes the leader has to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing to build trust on my team? Another thing that gets in the way a lot of times, and I think this is more and more of a challenge today, is just the workload. It takes time to work on building the team. And sometimes the need, especially for our organizations that are publicly traded and you kind of live your life quarter by quarter, it seems like it takes people off task. But ultimately, when you get folks focusing on building teams, it allows them to stay on task. It allows those meetings and do the math at your next meeting on how many people are sitting around the table, what that's costing, and then what was the tangible outcome that came from that meeting. And if the tangible outcome is that we're going to have another meeting about the meeting we just had, that's impacting productivity. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. It takes away today's productivity to a certain extent, but it's an investment in tomorrow's productivity. And our belief is by not working on teams, that becomes a higher consequence than spending the time today.
Okay, and our last two questions, I'm going to give them to you together because they're both short. What does the R stand for in heart, and what was the book that you were talking about?
So the book is The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, which is Patrick Lencioni. If you've ever read Patrick, you know he writes very easy books to understand. He's got a new book out that's kind of a reformatted book from his on employee engagement, which is fantastic. The other one that I mentioned was The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. That's another one that you could look into. And then was it the R that you asked about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one is to remember to look for my good intentions. So when somebody comes to me, I need to think that they have the right intentions in mind. And so look for the good as opposed to try to figure out what they're trying to do or how they're trying to manipulate me or what their negative intentions, because they're only trying to get their department or their restaurant or their property or whatever it is ahead, you know, that they're coming to me with the right intentions.
Okay. Kurt, thank you
All
so
right.
much. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Watch the chart website for upcoming webinars. They're every 2 months, and they are all recorded and posted on our website and accessible to anyone else that you think would like to sit in and listen. Thank you very much.
Okay. And I have a little video to show at the end.
Oh, right.
And so